additional information about the current controller. Response redirect permanent. You are using the response object from the HTTP context and return use redirect permanent. Else, just redirect without permanent to this URL that you specify here as a parameter, and here enter the response. So you're using actually the redirect permanent or redirect methods of the response object, which is a property from the HTTP context. And now, instead of returning some of the built-in actions, you say my action here returns a redirect to another action. So when there is a request to derived /redirect, it will go to derived /index.
Some of the built-in actions,
you say my action here returns
and
this will happen in the client side, because this will return the response to the users, and the users,
so when there is a request to derived
will, because of the out, because of this method redirect permanent or redirect, this is happening in the client side. The client side see that the response is redirect
in the client side
response, and it will make another request immediately to the users, and the users almost immediately the users will not even see, but they will see the URL redirect, so they will understand that there is a redirect in the client side. The client side see that the response in the directly in the index section will be revoked. So it will make another. So it go to the server side. The redirect returns to the users that this needs a redirection, and the browser will see the URL change. So they will understand that there is a redirection is required, and they will redirect to the other actions. And when you say permanent, even the browsers will know that when a request go to the server side, the redirect returns to the derived. This needs a redirection, and the browser they will automatically invoke the raft index even later. So that's why you use this permanent to notify the browser that even the browser permanent redirection for the future go to the server side. Don't need even to ask this URL. So this is for some kind of optimizations in the client side. The client side not to make a request when you use this permanent anymore. If you use the permanent, the browser that parameter permanent redirection. Otherwise, the redirect means temporary redirection. So the browsers will continue to for some kind of optimizations action if you make a request to the client side / to make a request derive / use the permanent redirect parameter. Permanent redirection. Custom very simple means just a redirection, but usually don't need to use it because there is a redirect method already created. If you make a request to, so we just saw how to create a custom action, but actually you don't need in this case because there is such a. And now when you say redirect index, it will usually redirect users to the index because there is a redirect method already created. Of course, so we just saw how to remember that on the server side you can immediately say in this case here return because there is other method. And now when you say redirect, it will return the data from the other method. So because this also is a tactic for direction, but this is happening on the server. So we just saw how. So if you need to redirect on this action, you can say always here return index because there is a the index itself because it's a method in .NET. It will normal method return the data from the other method. So return this method, and this method will return the view, which is actually action result. So everything is fine. You need to redirect this action. So but we decided to return redirect. So to inform the browser that there is a redirect to this action and the users will see. So you can redirect on the server side. It is very easy, especially with the same action result. So everything is fine. The same so the controller, but when it's a different controller, it's more harder for the browser that you cannot create so easily instances of controller. It should be automatically created by MVC. So that's why I redirect to another controller, another action. Usually it's a better idea to use the redirect itself. When it's a different controller, but when it's more harder for the browser, let's say next to you cannot create so the other one action of controller to the other. Why not directly automatically created by MVC optimization? So that's why
why a redirect to another another action usually
So here we have,
of course,
it's a different. Not when it's if you put both of these sections because they're the same. This is just an example that you can say for some actions which view to be returned. Okay, a view with name home page will be searched in the view folder. If let's say this not when it's if you put was called derived, they're the same. This is just an example. Make a request to index and say return the home page. It will search in the derived view folder to be returned with the views. The view with name home page will be searched in the view folder. Like what is the name of the view? Let's say this. If you do not specify the name of the derived here, the index and say return the home page. It will search the convention by convention with the view. You can always override home page and returning some specific name of the view. If you do not specify the name, if you pass here the index as a string, it will do the same. That's why if you are going to pass the index, better not do not pass anything because this will be automatically done by MVC. But if you need to return from this action another view, you're using this approach. Return index and specifying the name of the view. And later it will do the same. That's why in the folder views, better not to pass anything. It will search here in the views the name of the controller. But if you need to return from specifying, and later the name of the view. For example, this is the if and later this method returns in the folder returns privacy. It will invoke this view. It will search here pass the views, the name of the controller. Like here, if there is a data, no data is passed the name of the view to the model. So if and later so just the view surrender and return to the user privacy. It will invoke this. So it will search here pass the views, the name of the controller. So in the simplest possible way, this is you see just returning the view with the same name. Nothing is done now. Actually, the controller do not have any implementation. The view surrender. It just return the view, which is a single line of implementation, but actually between this return and there is nothing. In the simplest possible way, the only thing that you controller is doing is returning the view. Nothing is also, but just changing which view do not have any implementation. The view surrender as a name. The view. The view should have extension C# HTML, SEO, so there is no Visual Studio for all the views C# HTML. But this is the view which is returning the view. So the name is the name of the controller. Just changing which view not have any implementation. And later is the name of the view. The view should have extension. Now, as we discussed, you can use view back. So view data is absolutely the same collection, but you're using it really like a dictionary. So the name is the name of the controller. What you put in this dictionary, view data, which is a dictionary important. I'm not going to describe what's a dictionary, what's a HTML. You should know. Later you can access but it will the view data or with the view back. Now we're using the view data here. What you put in this dictionary, if you put something, if you set something in the view back, it will be what's a dictionary. It's actually behind the scenes is using the view data. If you put something in the view data, you can use view back to access it. Or the view back actually is now implementation of the expand object using a dictionary, and you know what something is expand object. Something in the view back, so it's like an object which you can add. If you put something in the view data, you can use view back internal dictionary, some data, and later you can access them with just the name of the property. And so later, if you say view back dot date, view back like a message, they will get just which you can. They are not accessed this way. They are just accessed again with the view data dictionary. So view data is more clear from my point of view. In both of them, you can make a mistake because it's a string. You can use one word here, or you can write a message with single S, and here with double S. And it will be accessed again with view data. The same is with the view data is more clear. No, syntax is much clearer. You don't have to make a mistake. Bracket, you can use one word here, string, or you can write a message with single S. You see bracket, string here, quote, another double string quote, double quote for the end of the string, and another. So these four symbols are not required when you're using the view back. If I go back to the view back, you see how more clear it is from my point of view. If you're going to use the view back, better use another use the view back property, not the view data property, and make it more clear. Both of them struggle with the same approach. If you rename it, if I go rename it, nobody will rename it here because this is a dynamic component. If you're going to use the view back, better use. I'm not going to discuss dynamic back, dynamic, not the view data runtime, make it more clear. Both of them struggle with the same.
I have one question.
Nobody will rename it here.
Why we need using dynamic object when we have dictionary?
I'm not going to discuss dynamic just because here in this case, just for simple syntax.
I
Just
have
for
one
simplicity.
question. Yes,
For the
but view data, why we need is more fast because dynamic object when we have dictionary.
No, in both cases it's absolutely the same because this is both of them have the same similar performance because view back when you set a property you see here the property actually is reading from the dictionary, so the dictionary reading from dictionary is pretty fast by the key. And if you're using the view data, that's one because the view data example here, you're accessing it by key in this dictionary here. So when you're using view back, there is additional step reading from the dictionary, but this step is verifying the key. And if you're using the view data, that's one because view data example here, but you need when you use data here. When you're using view back, so there is more reflection involved when you're using dynamic. What you mentioned, this step is verifying the key. Because behind the scenes it's using reflection to detect the view data. But when you are accessing a single property, reflection is fast enough. Data with reflection you can access one property million times per second. So it's totally not a problematic. So we can even measure how much it takes reflection to detect data to view. But I think if we pass this with the view back with the view data, the performance will be almost the same. We can compare it times per second. So it's totally not a problematic. So we can even measure performance is not problematic here. More important is which is more convenient for you. If both of them has problems when you pass view data, that's why the best way is to pass a model is the same. When you pass a model, it's a strongly typed model usually, and the model has this property: messages, data, and no need here for example for dynamic, which is more convenient for you. Creating a object, setting a message, setting the server property of this model, passing the model, when you pass model dot message. First you have auto completion usually, and the model has everything is strongly typed. There is no casting, there is no dynamic, there is no dynamic runtime checks of if this property exists or not, or throwing exception if it doesn't exist. So that's why passing model is the best way. And with the model you can have, and it's faster. Dynamic, there is no dynamic, no runtime checks, no searching if this property. But even if your data is fast enough, so that's why this casting model is the best way. For a small amount of data, it's not something you have million times per second or billion times per second you are doing. Casting it's not so fast in the internet, but it's not so slow. But even if your data is fast enough. And here you're casting not because the data is not data, because you know it's you're casting from object to date time because you're doing casting it. Otherwise, in this dictionary it returns actually a date time value, and you're casting because to invoke this property. You're casting not because if you invoke this property, you say there is no date time. You're casting from date to date time property in the object because your data is otherwise dictionary which returns for the key object time because it can contain everything. That's why it's a dictionary of string key value object that you need to cast in order to show. So the casting is from object date time, but because the data is really date time, it will be fast. I don't know what it is for the key object we need to compare, but I think probably you can cast 10 million times per second without the casting data time. Can check it even with this one. So when it's a web, it will be fast. If you pass them, I don't know how to cast them. You can cast with C# compare, but I think to see it's probably you can cast how much it is, and you can even in web because here we're in the web, we're going to even create exactly this. Why not? When it's a web, sounds very interesting. If I pass them, even that we are a little bit behind the schedule. can cast with C#, of course. Let's do this, for example, in the controller. You can even to see that web is not a problem. So now if I go and invoke and return to the back, let's put some data here in the index using the two approaches. View, let's do this dot f because you can make it dynamic to see that web is not a dynamic. So now if I go, you can see message. Let's put some data here. Message go to some using the two approaches. Later view view dot do this dot date dynamic go to date time dot now. Now dynamic you can see message. Later I put it message with the view back. Here it's just single set, doesn't matter what approach you're using. This is absolutely equivalent. This dynamic back is implemented with expand object view. You can see your data. And if you put it's a view data dictionary. Just single set, doesn't matter. And here this is absolutely equivalent. As you see, it's a string object. Dynamic back is implemented as a key. And later you can say view message. You can let's say message to in order to know that it's a really different. Some data dictionary. Just single set. And here, even that as I said, absolutely equivalent. View back, we will write in this the same dictionary. As you see, it's a string object. View data as a key. And later you can say view message. You can let's say message to in order to know that it's a really different. Some data dictionary. Go again to date time now. And now we have four properties actually in the dictionary, both from here, both from here. So you can access later both of them. All of them in the backend. Let's actually just for now print that we can use all the objects in the view. And now we have four properties. Some calculation result, and you have here calculation result, which is the strongly typed model, which is the way to pass this data. After all that in the backend, let's actually just for now print that we can use all the objects in the view to differentiate of this. You know that the HR is some calculation and later now say calculation result, which is the strongly typed model, which is the way to pass this data. View after back, yes, view date just for now. In the new one, we're going to print everything in the view here now of this. You know that the HR is some calculation and later now say message strongly typed model, which is the way to pass this data. Now we view the view after view back dot message. As you see, it's a dynamic. You have the same new one. We're going to print everything in the view here now. Actually, view back is a property of the razor page view, but when you where here the property is of the controller view put, they have the same property. When the view is invoked, it's a dynamic from one collection to the other actually, because the view behind the scenes is a class page, you know, which is created and so on. So message of the controller date put, they have the same property. When the view is invoked, not message. And now with the date time, the view behind the scenes is a class. Now which is created and so on. So message how to date. Let's say view big, view data, big, not message, view big. And now with the date time, okay, view data. Data and now again new one. Let's order to maybe it was better to use diff elements. In this case, let's say I will copy paste message to date to view data data now again now it's a message to yeah, maybe it was better to use diff element, but takes time. Let's say and here is a date to as you remember date to view
in view back, you need, I think, data.
Now
It's a message to you write twice message
but
in view back.
takes time. Let's say and here is a date to as you remember. Yeah, date to view. Thank you.
In view back, you need, I think,
good date to access this property. As you see, now you can without problem have here message. You can miss something. Nobody will check if this is valid or if you have here a mistake in both of them, you can have problems. So you cannot say one is more safer than the other. Actually, the safest is you see now you can without problem strong type object like this one. Message because everything here is very strong type. You cannot access a property which do not exist here. If you try it with the models, it will immediately complain. You cannot say one is like let's say the safest is you see model dot you see A B and the result. Let's try to access VB because what is everything here is it will not compile. You cannot access a property which do not exist. Compilation error. If you try it, you cannot build and run the application using this one. Like let's say. So that's why it's the safest, the best way. Now all of them are working and I will do all this later in a woo in order to just extract it. You cannot access a writing them otherwise let's just render them 1 million times and it will not using this one. Compare what will be different. We can even compare them. Later just raw casting. I will do all this later in a woo in order to just extract. But as I said, it will be million times of so let's now just see that everything is working and I will do in addition that one additional change later. Later just raw see that both of them can be accessed with view back. So let's see now when I go here before the view. So let's now just now in the view back as you see it's dynamic, you cannot see it. View data is a dictionary. And how many items we have? 4. Why 4? You see that both two of them was added using the view data and the view back is a wrapper dynamic here before the view property wrapper around the view data. That's why you have 4 properties. View data is a dictionary. Everything is how many items you can see that really it's a sum. You see that sum 2 of them was added using the view data and the view back is a wrapper dynamic here. So this is the result view. Message sum date sum message 2 date 2. So both of them are actually behind since are using the same dictionary. You can see that really it's which is the view data dictionary. So when you write something and here I take date which is using the dictionary. This is the expand object which is so that's why you can set every type message property message to date 2. Even that. So both of them are actually behind since you can set every property using this syntax, but this syntax is more nice. So when you write something and now if I go to the view, this is the expand object. Let's put a breakpoint here. That's why you can set every type and we're going to see the same absolutely the same. Even that put a breakpoint but it was never hit. I set every property using this syntax, but this syntax is more nice. F9 it was never hit. F9 and now if I go to the view, this is the expand object. Let's put a breakpoint here. It disappeared after a second. We're going to see the same absolutely the same. Visual Studio stuff. Something happened here. Probably I need to run it before, but we see both of them. The view back message, some date hit F9, some and the date is on the next line. It's in the same line date. It disappeared. Message 2, some 2, and the date. Visual Studio stuff. Again here. Maybe after every probably I need to before, but we see a new one in order to differentiate them. Some date hit F9, but the date is on the next line. Really, they are updated the same. That's why you can even actually from the view back you can access these properties. Again here also let me see message 2, date 2 using the view back. Even then they are from here. Message 2, date 2. Or from the view back you can access the previous update the same. That's why you can even actually from the view back which were set before. So with you can use later only the view back or the view date 2. Date 2 using the two of them are set to the view back. So two of them because date 2. Or from the same collection behind the scenes. That's why you can use later view back in the view data for message date, message to date to message date. So you can use later working with view back on the view dictionary or with the view back. It's up to you. Two of them are and this will work because it started. The same. All of them will be printed actually one after another. Let me put one separator here. Message date at least to separate them a little bit better. Working with view back on the view dictionary or with the view back. It's up to you. Two of them are and here this will work because maybe this can be considered as or bitwise or but there is a space. So let me put one. The arrays arrangement is very at least knows where where the HTML starts a little bit better. Where is the so as you see, some date and both of them are absolutely the same. Bitwise using view back, but there is for all of them, even that two were set with the data and the reverse set where the HTML. So they are the same update, same collection, the same data. Obviously, doesn't matter which you are going to use. Both of them are using actually the view data. Now to see what is the difference as a performance, a little bit harder to compare this performance here in the view and the reverse because we need just to extract the data. Let's extract just the data in properties. Doesn't matter which some period of time, and because it's a .NET, we can do everything for a little bit harder to compare this performance here a million times because we need just to extract the data. Let's extract the data. Now just extracting this data, and because it's a .NET data from collecting in order to compare, not rendering something. And because it's a view back, you can see let's extract okay the data where item 1 is equal to this, just extracting this data, just extracting from the view back compared to the view data. Later we can put these variables to because it's a view back, you can see in the view, which usually is very bad idea or I write it this way, but doesn't matter. We want to do it. Just equal to this compared to the view data. But later we can put C# and this is equal to this because it's a view back, you can see in the view. Now, which I think usually is very bad idea for accessing the data using the dynamic. It's the dynamic in the razor to C# view back, which is a dynamic, and it's a part of property of the razor page in the view. Now, and now we need to see how much time it takes. If you have a lot of source code using the dynamic, you can directly start a block of view back, which is a dynamic, and it's a part related to the razor page somewhere later. Now, and let me just see how much time it takes in this way. If you have a lot of source code using the dynamic, you can, and that's why I put it in the block, because I wish to compare it. Maybe I can watch stopwatch, stopwatch, and let me watch using system diagnostic when this is equals put here way, like in C#, but it's now stopwatch, and that's why I stopwatch, because I wish to compare stopwatch starts new. Maybe I can watch stopwatch, go to a stopwatch start watch using system diagnostic new when this is equals put here way, 1 minute to complete, 2 minutes to complete this. Stopwatch, stopwatch. So this is the first item here. Measure, measure 1 equal to stopwatch dot start new. When this is equals put here 1 minute to complete without completion DevOps. Stopwatch, what is DevOps time? Later, let's say again start here and compare measure the next two, which is going to use the view data. And in order to use the view data, let me copy it up to this moment without completion DevOps. For H, replace this later, let's say again start here and compare nobody knows. Annoying, which is going to nobody no problemos. I will use one tactic to this moment out. This is very nice when you have a lot of source. Place this and writing in all the wires together. Nobody knows. Why not? Annoying. So you can write in multiple wires because I wish to copy the entire source code. This is very nice when you have hundreds of repeating wires. This is, for example, something like this, and you have a lot of. I need to put something before that and after that, like some bracket. Okay, out, annoying. Keep the out only when you are selecting to select a block of source. This is very nice when you have just hundreds of reflecting wires. Out, for example, something like this, and you can say, okay, open, put something here for that and after, and end like some bracket to close some bracket here, for example. Out, before, out, or after, or in the middle of some source. So writing in multiple wires of source. So it's very useful feature of the Visual Studio, because sometimes you have a lot of wines and you wish to do similar changes like what I did actually.
How we can do it? Can you repeat?
Sorry?
How we can do it? Can you repeat?
With the out writing in multiple wines. So it's very useful feature of the Visual Studio, because sometimes you have a lot of wines and you wish to do similar changes like
How we can do it?
Or you can try it. Out, this is the same in actually the out of applications in Microsoft, in the Vertex Word mainly, for example. Out to select a keyboard, sometimes you see a rectangle or otherwise without out, it's just the lines. But you wish a rectangle specific. Or you can try it. So for example, you wish this to replace it. Sometimes this, for example, you wish this view back to change with another. I select out and say another or all the lines. Rectangle, you're writing in multiple lines. Otherwise without out, so now it's not so useful because only 4 lines. It's very quick to do this, but otherwise it's better. And now let's measure. Sometimes this, for example, you wish this view back, so you don't need to stop the stopwatch here. You can do it like something like stopwatch to stop. So when you say what's so useful would be only 4 lines, but let's say quick to do this, but otherwise it's measure 2. Now let's measure equal to now because we restarted it. Start video or restart, you can say, but start is better. Stopwatch. And now we have both of them, measure 1 and measure 2. Let's just print both of them. But let's say quick to measure 1 is equal to that one. This can be in a diff now because we restarted it. In order to be in a new line really, measure 1 is better. Measure 1. And now in view, as you see, I start to write almost a C#. And what I said, this is always better idea to write a lot of C# in the view. I'm still in the view. In some moment it looks like I'm in the C# because we restart. I'm in the view. Measure 1, but really measure 1 now is very nice. Measure 1 because as you see, I created some variables and later I use them. Later we're going to see that views are extremely powerful. Better idea to write a lot of C# ASP.NET view. Now let's see what is the moment it looks like what are our results, which is faster. Measure 1, but really measure 1 view back or view date. Nobody knows. I created some variables and later I use them. I suppose that using directly that views are extremely powerful. So you said sometimes you need to cast. Now let's see what is the moment it cases. If you need something to cast, which is fast. But if you say this is a string, view back or view date, you don't need to cast. But actually behind the scenes you do the cast using directly the date time value, which you can. So you said in order to create absolutely the same like the example. Probably that's what you said. Now because if you say this is a string, so it say it's a string. Because if you say it's a string, but you do not cast it, it will immediately complain. The same like if you use directly in the view, you can. So now, for example, in order to complain, same here. Even if you use to extract the date, the working week, if you need to cast, for example, date. If I use the weekday, I need to cast. The same like if you use directly in the view, you can do it again here. For example, view day, I need to cast to date time, and later one additional bracket in order to complete the casting, cast to date time, this value, and additional bracket. If I use the weekday, okay, this is casted, give me the date, do it again, the date of the weekday, day, I need to, now it's a date time, it's not a date time, and later one additional bracket in order to say the day of the week, which is date time, this value, and additional bracket, 2 times actually, so the quantity size, this is casted, give me, yeah, 3, because we need also to weekday to finish this. Now it's a date time, so this is how it's working. So similar to this, we need to do the casting later to invoke the method and just 2 times indicate. So our casting is required even here. Yeah, 3. Here it's not required because it's dynamic. It will be dynamically. Now it's a date time, but let's only here. Here we need so similar to this. Really the values. We need to do the casting later. So just 2 times indicate. So you can even copy here all the items and they will be placed. Here it's not, but it's pretty simple to in order to do it manually. So now I need here. So here and now just for the last date time. So casting, which is but in order to have access, you can even copy here all the items and they will be placed. Here it's not, but it's pretty simple to. So this will compare how otherwise. So now I need here and just in order to see that this is really here the date time casting, which is date in order to have this will be determined day of week. So this will be casting. So in order to display both this message so in the same way. So you see it's much simpler. But in both cases this is not. There is output composition here that this property there is a verification if you do some mistake here. So there is no verification for stop. So this has even a little bit advantage of this message subset in the same way. So you see, it's much simpler. This property is not checked. Actually, this key in the dictionary is not checked, but later all the properties are checked by the compiler. There is a verification additional because you can say day of week later compare to and later dot. You can use other methods, later to string, which all of this will be successfully key in the check is not checked, but later all the properties are checked by the will be checked. So there is a benefit because you can say day of week later there is a strong compare to and later property here everything is checked. Where the syntax here is this will be up to you, which is both of them are supported. Let's compare dynamic. There is a benefit casting because you can say day of to extract the value. We do not do anything with the value, just measuring how much time it will take for 1 million iterations here. Up to you. Usually there is some when we have benchmark. Let's compare warm-up iterations. But to extract the value, we do not do anything with the value. But we are in the context of the web application, even that we are measuring some treating for 1 million casting. Let's say F5 and see how much it will take. There is some so who wins? Both of them are very fast, as I said. It's a 1 million iterations. This takes 1/3 of the second, where the casting takes it's a little bit slower, of course. So which is the faster? The casting. So who wins?
Dictionary is fast, yes.
It's a 1 million iteration. What we have in the dictionary, casting and whatever takes faster, 1/3 of the second. Both of them are using the dictionaries behind the scenes. Dictionaries are slower, but as you see, so which is some will expect that a lot of casting. So who wins will be slow.
Fast, yes.
But no, the dynamics are slow because to check dynamic behind the scenes with reflection is checks a lot of stuff. Casting here is faster behind the scenes. You can take this in order to compare a little bit better. So which is some will expect 10 million iterations for both of them. So let's try with the see if it will work. No, not we need to, but it's always faster. Behind the scenes with reflection is checks. Compare them. Let's just restart it for the last time and complete this. Which is a little bit strange. Of course, it will take 4 seconds to render the page now because 2 seconds and a half against this. So 2 times faster. 3 seconds against 1.5 seconds. But then let's compare are fast for the first cast for the last time and complete the slow cast. But not a little bit strange. Of course, it will take 4 seconds to render the page now because 2 seconds and a half against this. So 2 times some of you are still not connected, but so I will use this 1 minute, 2 minutes until everybody is connected. Refresh what we discussed the last time. Very, very quickly. Of course, it will take 4 seconds to render the page now because 2 seconds. You remember the last time we discussed that some of you are still not connected, but ASP.NET MVC applications. So I will use this 1 minute, 2 minutes until which mean web API or just web applications with MVC controllers. You have 2 methods in so-called startup class. You remember configure services and configure. So this is ASP.NET MVC application where you configure the services which are used by usually by the controller, just web applications with MVC controllers. You have 2 when you have dependencies between the services. And we discuss that the other is to configure middlewares. And we saw different type of middlewares, the run middleware, which is terminating the middleware when you have middleware pipeline, multiple samples we saw with the use middleware. After that, we discussed that we saw the order of the middlewares, type of middleware does matter. So terminating example of the middleware when you have middleware pipeline, you have configure 2 middlewares and also one service. The use middleware, which can be used in the configure method. The order of the middlewares, so middleware does matter. Also here we discussed that you can short circuit the middlewares. After that we discussed that you can have 2 middlewares as you wish. Later we discussed that usually you create a class which can be used in the configure method. Otherwise you have too many middlewares if you have many. Also here we in that you can start short file to the middleware. Actually, this is an example of later the new usually you created a type of templates which can be created with Visual Studio, but it's not so important. So if you create a new version, if you create a project, the module view controller ASP.NET MVC with this template for .NET 6, let me just create one empty one for .NET 6. It will use a little bit more compact version. If you create a project startup file, there is no module view controller file. There is only a program.cs. Maybe you already saw this, where you have a program. Let me just create one empty one for .NET 6, where you don't have even a class. A little bit more. So this is only for this file. Otherwise, in .NET and C# you always should have a classes. Maybe where you need to have implementation. There is no way actually to have an implementation without methods or variables without classes. Everything lives in classes, which is very good and very nice because there is many languages where this is not forced, which is a better idea, isn't it? To have some global variables, some global methods which are accessible everywhere. So, but here there is some sample, which is very good and very nice. Only one file where you have this strange, a little bit strange template, which is a better. But this is similar like our variables. Let me also create another template. I think we here before. So, but we have here other templates that we use. I don't remember which was the last template that we created with you. Just need to check the video. But this is similar like usually you have this startup file. So from the program template, I think we here you configure. We have here other templates that we use. I don't remember which was the last. In the startup file, you created with these two important methods: configure, configure middlewares, and usually you have configure services. Startup file from the configure different services which can be used everywhere in the application. So in the MVC.NET 4, .NET 6 configure, you need to you have usually different templates, but here it's configure services. Let's say configure different services. And the second is configure middleware. So there is no big difference. So in the MVC.NET there is, let's say, it is put in one single file. Configure. You need to you have something like this. So nothing so nothing so different. Actually, we can actually always create this class startup file. I like to put, let's say, all the configurations in one single file. Services and middlewares outside of this class here. So because here it's not even a class. Of course, you can create a class program. If you create class actually, it will be absolutely the same like always create previous. And here you should have a main method. So this is actually the main method implementation, which exists in the other templates. If you go to the other template, you will see that actually the program you have a class main, and here everything it's like actually you put everything in a main method. And here so have a main method. That's actually the main method. Here you can say implementation static void main. There is also snippets for this template and move everything in this main method. So nothing so special about this template. So put everything in a main. Microsoft, I don't know why they try to create this strange organization of the source code for this file. For this template, when you create a new project, otherwise, you know, in the real world, when you are working in your company, you do not create this everyday new projects, new web application project. They create the project and later start to evolve it, start to add more source code. For this some projects, for this template, you develop for many months, even years. In the real world, when you are working, so you do not create a new project non-stop. Here for our courses, we created many new projects because to demonstrate something. Otherwise, you create once the project, configure it, and start to add more controllers, more models, develop more views, many months, other project dependencies between them, and so on. You do not create a new project. But when you create a new project, here for our 6, we created many. This is the simplified version to demonstrate something. Otherwise, startup file, which I don't like so much because I usually prefer to have this startup class, which we discussed that there is a configure services and configure methods, two important methods, which you can use to configure services and methods. And where which was our last template which we used, I don't have this startup, where we registered some services, I remember. It was calculator configure methods, because if you are on this site, you can use have configure services. And as I remember, we created one page where we have something a little bit strange, calculating some numbers, where we registered some services. Am I correct? It was calculated configure methods. Because if you are on this side, we will have this big number calculator. So we probably created this way too. Do you remember this template where we registered one service? Where we registered some calculator. Let me start again this application. So we created one service and use it in the controller, where usually you use configure services in this way too. Do you remember? Am I correct? Together with you, develop this simple application where we pass in this application. Where we pass some numbers, we created one were calculated here, and we just display the result of the calculations in one text box, and we just try to. Do you remember? Am I correct? Together with you, we have some big calculation like a power of b, where a and b are pretty big numbers. So we created one were calculated. So we put everything here, of course, in the calculations in the other part, because we do not mention everything. And let's try this again. This is 5 power like 555 a power not 55. And as you remember how we achieved this, we created one big, we put every numbers calculator. We have two calculators, this other numbers calculator, and we have a method power off. And let's try this again. This have this method power 555 a power number x, which was, and this is the power which we created the exponent. We put every numbers calculation. We have two calculators. Not exactly exponent, is the power x power off. Where we have this power number power, and we have an interface where we have up and power, and in our controller we have the exponent described in the calculation. Dependency we have an dependency exponent, the calculate power. We never mentioned which is the calculator which we are going to use. And we have an interface. We have two calculators. A simple calculator where the power of is just using the math, but cannot calculate all big numbers. And one more big numbers calculator which can calculate whatever big are the numbers. Doesn't matter how big. We never mentioned which is the calculator which we are going to use. So even it can accept. We have two calculators. So it can even calculator where the power of just using the math, but cannot calculate. It can even calculate some big numbers with the add operations. But we do not calculate because we accept double and double. In order to allow big numbers, maybe it's better to use big number, another type, big number, big integer here in .NET. That doesn't matter. Calculate so much. We have two calculators. Doesn't matter. We have I calculator, but we do not calculate here interface, and both of them implement this I calculator and I calculator. And only one place in our application, as you remember, another type. We registered big integer, which doesn't matter, service to use. If we go to our startup file, we have I calculator, but we do not register here that, and both of them implement a single instance will be created, only one for place in our application, this interface, I calculator, and the instance of the type, the object will be of type big numbers calculator. And we go to our when the application is started, and when that application is started, MVC go to this configure services and this configure method, both of them are executed. And later, when someone needs I calculator, like our home controller, when the MVC will create an instance. And when if someone else needs again the instance, it will return this instance that was created previous services and this configure method, both of them are executed. And later, when someone because we mentioned that our home controller, when the MVC will set that the life cycle, and when if someone else needs service, is a singleton, which means that a single instance will be created only. And we can check really this if we put here a breakpoint in the constructor. We mentioned that only once it will be created. Let's refresh. Let's start the application and see that the next request which I'm going to do on this simple web page. So now we have one big calculator created in the beginning, which was used to calculate this. And later it's refresh calculated, and you see no new instance is created later even for the next request. Even if I click here refresh, even adding some new calculations. So this or other pages used to calculate. We have other pages where we later it's refresh calculated, and you see no new instance is created later even for the next request. Even if I click here refresh, even adding some get okay, it's done. Calculations. It will not produce sounds anymore. So, as I said, just a single instance was created. Even if I use it in different pages or in the same page, it doesn't matter. For every request, the same instance is used because we said create. It will not produce sounds anymore. This object only once. Just a single instance was created. Our web application. Even if I use it in different pages or in the same page, it doesn't matter. For every request, the same instance is used because we said create. So let's call this this object only don't need to save, just we wish to see the new template, which is pretty close to the current one. And now otherwise, if I go to our startup file and say, so let's call this register this dependency, at this save, just we wish to see the other template, which is pretty close to the current one, transient. And now this means that every time when an instance of iCalculator is required, which means implementation of this our register numbers calculator, a new instance will be created. Otherwise, it will be the same instance every time. Or we have one more additional. Let's try this now, and after that we're going to that implementation actually in our lectures. A new instance is created. So once this will be invoked, once it will register that, it will be the same instance. Where iCalculator is required every time. It will create an instance every time. Let's try this now, because we registered here the life cycle of this service I lecture. A new instance is transient, which means every time it will create a new instance. Let's really try this and see here when we have a request to it will create, and if it's really going to create this instance. So registered here the life cycle. Now I put breakpoint in the constructor also, and we will see that now I see someone created big. Let's calculate really try this. Here when we have a request this instance, if it's really going to create this instance. So here you cannot actually see. If you go to see show external code, you will see that someone created the dependency injection, created it, and because it needs to create to activate the controller, to create the instance of the controller. So the MVC actually here controller activator, which is creating the controller because of the request code. The MVC internally see the request to the home controller, created it, so it knows that it needs to create an instance of the home controller. But later, when see that the controller and the constructor accept calculator, it's the dependency which is creating the controller because of the request code. So that's why in the code we see later, it's using the dependency injection to invoke some internal method controller service lookup, which is to get the service, and it will create the dependency instance, and get service will actually invoke this method, which internally is implemented. Of course, you don't need to implement it here, and it will create the instance of this. When we click F5, we see that now service dependency injection, it will create internally, and we created an instance of calculator. If you put the mouse here, you see that really the calculator is of type internal calculator implemented. So MVC created the instance for you here, and it will create the instance of the constructor. When we click F5, we see that now the dependency injection, and you never created this instance. It was automatically created, and it passed the calculator and later invoked the constructor's calculator of your. So MVC created the instance, and later it will invoke the method because it first creates the instance of the controller, and later and finally invoke the index method because the current request and is later invoke this of your is required to invoke this indexation. And you can see this what is the current request everywhere. Remember that in Visual Studio you have so many debugging tools. Let's say the quick watch is one of them. to watch some of the variables, like you can see this dot request is required to invoke this dot, and you can see this what is the current request, and you can see what is the path to what is the request, which is the request. So now the current request is to slash to domain slash some of the variables, like the default that you can check, and you know that because of the current route, you can see what we're going to discuss a little bit today, which is the request. So now the next time is to slash means that we need to invoke the index method of the home controller, which is called index action because of the current route. That's why, as you see, the machine is doing this. Now let's change the values here, even without changing. So now the next time it will work again. But let's again enter 5 multiplied by check power of 555. Enter, and to see again it creates the instance of this. And if you see the call stack again, it's the same call stack. MVC internally needs to create a controller. The controller requires again calculator, so it creates the calculator. Later it creates the controller and passes the to see again. And later invoke the action with the appropriate parameter. Now stack again is the same for A, MVC internally, and for the B, that's what we mentioned in the URL 555. Creates the calculator. So let's click F5, and now it's and as you see, every time it creates the instance. Why? Because we register that the home controller depends on for the B, that's what we mentioned controller URL 555. The home controller depends on iCalculator, and iCalculator now is registered in the configure services that is a transient, which means the Wi-Fi depends every time creates that what we mentioned create an instance of this. When iCalculator is required by someone later, and it can be a controller is registered, it can be another configure services, whatever. It's a transient, which means the Wi-Fi we don't know every time. Doesn't matter in which instance of this. When iCalculator is required by someone later, and it can be a controller. Now to see that what we mean really in the dependency, let's say the iCalculator, our we don't know big numbers calculator has some dependencies. And when iCalculator is required by someone later, and let's say when every time when this iCalculator is invoked, maybe this one calculator, not the other calculator, big numbers calculator has some dependencies. It will work all the operations in some file, and it will remember what with what values these operations were invoked. This calculator and maybe this one in order to have calculator. Both of the operations invoke, maybe we can implement some a little bit more in the home controller, a little bit more functionality, because now the index is working somehow the power, which is not so clear. And let's create also another in order to have both of the operations invoke, maybe we can implement some a little bit more in the home controller, a little bit more functionality, because now the index is working somehow the power, so it's a little bit clear. And let's create also another okay, it doesn't matter. Every time when we invoke this power, we work something, and let's say we are going, so the iCalculator we have some dependency. We move the iCalculator to another library, so it's a little bit so the interface by which it will depend, if we need to mention it, okay, it doesn't matter. Every time when it will be should be visible for the web application and for this project. So I will create the work, the iCalculator, maybe another, we have another library, even another project, let's say Wogger, interface by which it will depend, let's say, if we need to mention it, okay, it doesn't matter. Something extremely simple, Wogger, which will work for the web application and for this project. And let's create the Woggers. Later we can add different Woggers, and we can actually really create some different Woggers. Let's create this with .NET. Something extremely simple, the other which will work for .NET 6. Let's check before that. And let's create property. later we cannot define .NET 5. So .NET 5, let's keep it with .NET 5, even that you can change it to .NET 6. Let's create it's not a problematic with .NET. So let me continue because I'm going to reference this project. That's why I need before that keep the same .NET property. So let's say .NET 5 Woggers. Let's keep it with .NET 5. Change it to I'm using here. It's not a problematic with .NET. And let's say now I have continue because I'm going to reference file Wogger, which is logging something in the file. Of course, I will use this possible implementation. So let's say writing some message in the file, like it will be .NET 5, void wog here, and here it will accept a message. Let's say it will save this message in the file. And let's say file, which is logging something with system.write all text. This is the message. We can the message void we can write with a new line or whatever. Let's say even remember the time and let's say the message in the new line, something like this. So let's say the message is equal to the current time, date time dot now. Let's say to string. Let me let's say even remember the time and let's say the message in the new line, something like this. Let's go to the new line equal to environment. The current line we can do the message was again environment new line string. In order to be a little bit better formatted the final result. So we work the message, write all text where in some file, and let's even here have the file which can be configured wog.txt environment string, and what we're going to work the message. So this will override the file. That's why I'm going to use append all text which will append to this file. If the file edition does not exist, it will create it. The next time it will open the file, but it will position the cursor at the end of the file, it will just append some data to this file. We're not going to discuss input output with .NET, but these are some pretty easy atomic operations you can use. We call them atomic because a single line you can open the file, but it will position a single line you can read the entire file or writing something in the file. So the previous, for example, file not read all text are similar, or read all lines of the file. We call similar operation, which is a single line operation to read, write, a lot of text bytes, for example, of the lines without even to read all text. Open file to do all this automatically. So this, for example, we open the file, we will seek the cursor to read the position at the end of the file, we write it, and we will close it. All this automatically without there is a lot of such method in this file class you can use, and the file info classes which are part of the system, which we are not going to cover here, but they are perfectly covered in the other courses. At the end of the file, we write it, so and we will close it. You can play with them; they are very easy to use, and all of them are perfectly documented in this file. And now we added the file in simplest possible way. Let's create an interface of this. How to extract an interface? You know, right-click, extract interface. At the end of the file, we write it. So let me find this extract interface, and I will create iWogger, which will have this operation. So iWogger will be here. Let's create the same project Woggers, and this is our file Wogger. Let's rename the file to have so let me find the same name. So we have file Wogger, which will create iWogger, which will have this operation created. Perfect. iWogger will be now we can have more Woggers with the same. So maybe we have Woggers, and this is our database Wogger, which will name the file. Put this data in a database. Doesn't matter so much. And now let's say our calculator, big number calculator, only this we have a dependency calculator. We will not have more dependencies, but big number has this dependency. So I will say I create a database Wogger, which will name the file. So as you see data in a database, the reference the other project. And now you can reference using right-click on this reference to the project, or revisions to do automatically offer you to do this automatically. I do this with this, and it will do automatically two things. First, adding the reference to the project, so it will appear. You can reference using immediately, and also adding the project or the using revisions to two things doing it, which is very nice. Here is the Wogger. You see, I do not mention which of the two Woggers. we to do only much about the Wogger. First, maybe discuss this project. We never know about the real Wogger. And also, I think in some cases it's really using two things. They do not know, because if we move the interface to a project and we reference only the this project and never reference only the Wogger, it cannot even create this Wogger, because if I now can never know about the real Wogger because I have a reference to the project. But if I move the interface to some, because if we move the interface to another project and we reference maybe this project and never reference and which is not normal, because this is a complex math library. It doesn't depend of it should not depend of some Woggers. Let's creating some project which I will call with some artificial name interfaces. Just to describe this, because this is very common maybe technique and which is not normal because this is a complex. I would say this is just interfaces. It should not depend of some Woggers. Let's create where we're going to create where we're going to move this interface, which is the Wogger, just the Wogging interface, just this interface, nothing else. And let's even create it just with the name. I will later move just the source code. Interfaces at where we're going to move this new item, iWogger, with the operations, so no implementations there, just the Wogging interface, just this interface, something else. So I will move this interface now here. We don't need the interface here. I move it here. Interfaces is iWogger. That's everything. We don't need this class with the operations. Now let's just the Wogging. In our file Wogger, let's remove the Wogger because we don't have a references. Now as you see, let's add now the project reference from the Woggers to the interfaces. And let's remove the reference from the complex math library to the Woggers. I will remove this. And now the I calculator, we don't have a reference. Now as you see, calculator cannot see the Wogger. So we cannot reference the Woggers, but we don't want to add a reference to the. Let's remove the reference from the complex math library. We don't wish to the Wogger, and it's not normal. Now some I calculator complex math library to know about cannot see database Woggers and other. We cannot reference the Woggers, but we don't. The Woggers are should be all the implementations of the Woggers should be in the Woggers. We don't wish. So now it can know it should know it can depend of the interfaces. Let's do this manually. Add project reference to the interfaces only, not to the Woggers. And now it knows about this interface. We don't wish. So doesn't know about the Woggers. It knows about the interfaces. Like here, complex, but it can depend on the interfaces. So it knows about the interface, but not for some concrete implementation. And now it cannot even create without adding a reference to the project, which we don't want to know about the Wogger, because this is just some interface. There is no implementation. Maybe here in the Wogger we can have thousands. It knows about the interface, but not so in our web application. Let's add that cannot even create without adding math library and also to the interfaces. Only interfaces, because and here we can, of course, we need also to the Woggers, but this is the web application who knows the interfaces in the Woggers. So in complex math library never knows about the Woggers, knows only about math library, some interface to the interfaces, and because it's called Wogger, only interface is Wogging somewhere. And here we never knows about the implementations which are in the Woggers. This is the web application knows about them, knows the interface, and it can complex configure. Never knows, let's say, in our knows only about startup file this dependencies. For example, it can say, okay, for services somewhere. And it never knows about the implementation, which are maybe in the Woggers. The web application knows about them, knows the interface, and it can. This is the safest way. Wogger, the iWogger, for example, it can say interfaces used file Wogger. And which is part of the Woggers implementation, which are maybe in the Woggers. For example, as you see, file Wogger should implement iWogger, the safest. Here we have, of course, this mistake. Wogger, forget we changed the namespace. And now, as you see, we registered that the iWogger, which is part of the iWogger, the dependency injection should return file Wogger. As you see, the base calculator never knows who will be here with the Wogger. It only knows about some interface, and it can use this interface. Let's now as you use this interface Wogger dot message, as you see, of the iWogger, the dependency injection should return file which we can use. The base calculator never knows Wogger dot the Wogger. What only knows about, and we can say, and it can use this interface. Let's Up to this operation wogger word message, as you see, with params, and you can say A and we can use B. And wogger dot of course use what only knows about it we can say and of course you can work any other operations if you need, for example this one, and here it's not n b x and power and auger dot of course use params x and power and we work both operations. So when of course they're invoked any other operations and what as you see this one. And here it's not if nbx. We have the auger in front, we just will say to the big number calculator that it depends of some auger. We never know how to create. Even as I said, this class even cannot create this auger. So when if we do not add a reference to the project, which we are not going to add because this is the best, the correct way. Even it tries to say the big number calculator that it will depends of some auger. It cannot create even even like here. This class even cannot create this. So as you see, it's we do not add. There is no, you cannot only just, you need to add a reference to the project because it's in the current solution, but if it's not even tried, it cannot even create and it should not be able to create. It cannot create. So as you see, it can depend of something even that cannot create, which it cannot create. There is no, sometimes only just you need to add a reference. In the auger there is some other dependencies. It cannot even be possible to create because in the auger there's some dependencies like where is the database, it can depend on something. Where is some work file, which work on the calculator, it's just a calculator. Sometimes doesn't need to know about that details. There is some other, and you see the dependency injection, how is delayed, it's possible to create, which is very nice because some can later change the work. Where is the database, it can whatever the database, constructor, some work file, because nobody's using except one place, just constructors, and doesn't need to know about complete work. This work class will continue even after we change whatever we wish to change, because we can. The only thing that this class depends is of this iWogger interface. So the only thing that it knows that there is operation locally which accepts a single message, a complete Wogger parameter. That's everything that this class will continue. If there is other operations after we change whatever we wish. If there is some constructors, it doesn't know. The only thing that this class who is the Wogger? It doesn't know iWogger interface. So in the Wogger will be different. There is operation the next version which doesn't accept a single message. And this is good because if we change anything in the Wogger, this class will remain always the same. If there is some this, for example, let's say some kind of service, some utility in this case, class depends on some service, but not of it doesn't know anything except that it has a single operation which is called work. This class because it depends. Here is how one this how one class depends only of the interface utility in this case. The others not depends on the implementations of the others. And this is the general rule in object-oriented good object-oriented programming. When possible, one class will always depends on the interface of the others, not the implementation of the others. So, and this is achieved with interfaces. The other not depends on the implementation of C#. The entire source code is extremely simple to write. Simple calculation. Simple when possible. Here is the dependency which involves this simple operation. That's everything that it needs to know. And this is achieved with know how many workers and everything about dynamics of C#. Which is good. And if we start extremely simple to see, I will put one constructor. When possible, here is the dependency which involves this dependency simple operation. Breakpoint here and breakpoint here. The constructor is more important. That we're going to see that someone will create this instance, and this is the MVC dependency injection, which will see that for the home controller, it will see, oh, I need a calculator. And it will check. Okay, let's see what was configured for a calculator. Big number is more important. That it will go to see that someone will create a calculator. Okay, how to create this injection? Which will see that some Wogger to be created, and it will check what was the what we have for the iWogger. It will create iWogger, and it will pass configure for iCalculator. Who is responsible to creating the instances and passing the instances to the constructor? The dependency injection, not you. It will create all this. It will pass them, and it will configure everything in one central place. Usually this place is here, but you can create a class who is responsible to creating the instances and passing the idea, and move all of this registration in a special class in order to remove all of this here because there are some custom services you can create class like usually these illustrations and move the source code there, which is a very good idea usually. Because sometimes the services become a lot of services, and why not to move them in a separate method? Now there are two, but when they become 100 or 500, it will be too much, and you will move just to another class, another method, which is a very good idea. Because sometimes to remove them and to see it's better for which interface, which is the service. Why not to move them? There is different methods. Now there are two. Sometimes you don't have an interface, so you can register some class event. Let's say another class, another method. We have some implementation somewhere because sometimes where we don't see it's better. Class, let's say the logger, which is the service. Why not to move them? There is different methods. Now there are two. Sometimes let's say where the logger. Let's say we have something like a configuration. Let's say somewhere we have some implementation somewhere. Maybe here because sometimes where we don't see it's better. And the logger. Let's say the logger. Why not to move them? There is different methods. Now there are two. Sometimes depends on this configuration. Something like a configuration. So let's add it here directly. Let's say something like a class configuration, which will return where to work in what, in which file. Configuration, and it will be extremely simple implementation, like just having configuration, one single property. So let's add it here directly. Let's say something like a class configuration, which will return where to work in what file, batch file. Let's say configuration, and here we're going to configure it in the constructor. This like just not having work file path. The configuration should usually read from a configuration path, but now we say work.txt. And now this our logger will not depend, and here logger will depend on the configuration. Now we see we put here configuration path. We the configuration should take care of variable because of it's more easier. And now the configuration txt. Here we do not hard code this name, we take it from the configuration dot work file path. And now we don't want to see we put here file configuration interface, but if we don't wish to take care of this, what we're going to register in our services is this. So we can say services configuration dot work file path. Now this is services dot add configuration, and now we can even say that it's just a single class because what we're going to be register in our just single should be created for this. So we can say services add singleton for this configuration. As you see, no interface here, but still. And now we can even say that it's just a single class. In the file logger, we do not say how to create the configuration. Now the configuration should be created for constructor, but sometimes even the configuration depends on something or has some parameters. No interface. We don't want to create them, but still, we just say that the logger depends on the configuration. See now how a little bit started to be big dependencies between not big dependencies, but even the pretty complex dependency chain or has some and hierarchy between the objects. The big number depends on something which is iLogger. iLogger, we should say that because we have depends on here file logger which depends on the configuration. The configuration does not depend on anything, but we have some configurations and everything. But we will resolve dependency chain without hierarchy between. So now the big number depends on something which is iLogger. iLogger, we should say that by the dependency injection depends on here file logger which depends on the configuration. Now as you see file logger will be created. Let's click F5 and later I will change the calculator to see that if we use the other calculator, nobody will need the file logger. In this case, nobody will create the file logger when it's not needed. So now someone created the file logger. We know from the stage that this is the MVC dependency injection because let's click F5 and later I will change the calculator to create a controller, and the controller it see that something. In this case, nobody will create the file logger when like it's not why we missed here. So now someone created the file logger. It see that in the controller there is a calculator. The calculator requires the logger, and that's why it started to create a controller and logger. And it actually it's automatically created just before that the configuration where we have like it's not a single property. Where is the file? So it see that so it's creating all the dependencies. So the calculator requires the logger. So let's create this constructor and pass it the logger. Now it's known as the file auger, and the file auger has a reference to the configuration, and everything is all the dependencies are done. And now here where is the file? Finally, it's managed to create a list of all the dependencies calculator because it's dependent. So let's say the auger depends on the configuration. Now it's create all the dependencies. This is the dependency chain here, and finally it's invoked done. And now here where is the file? Everything is working. And when we invoke the power off, you can see that the power off is using the auger configuration, the file auger, and the auger is working something in the file where exactly to work, and finally the configuration say in this file, and we work this file, and everything is working. When we invoke that we here invoke, it will be worked now with these parameters. The file auger again created calculator, and finally it is working something in the file, not to continue to debug it, I will disable the breakpoints and just here passing 5 times automatic time, everything that we normally we can even calculate, even we can work the result, calculator, what the final result was or whatever. Now to debug it, I will disable the breakpoints 5 and just let's say here passing 5 times easier to calculate that 5. Normally we can even calculate power of 3, a little bit more complex. But now if I click refresh 1, 2, 3, it will work all of these messages. And if I can check if really there is a file, and you see the calculator, the controller depends on calculator depends on the file of the auger or some auger, but doesn't know. Now if I click refresh 1, 2, 3, it will work. And later if I go and see if there is such a file in the check if really there is a file, and you see the calculator .NET 5 directory, we're going to find the auger or some auger, but doesn't know. Now if I click refresh work.txt, we can see where is the work.txt. If we go to the such a file in the check, go to the file, where is the current directory of this? It's a .NET 5. There is the auger somewhere. We're going to
in solution file.
Yeah, here is the current directory. So the current directory is the work.txt. If we go to the current file, so we have the file, and if we open it, you see that file, where is the current directory? We worked exactly this, the parameter .NET 5, there is the auger somewhere. We're going to
in solution file.
So probably we have some type of here. So the current directory with 1155 and different type of parameters, because we click here 3 times, refresh, we worked the messages out here almost immediately. That was 3. But really, it's logging there. This is because probably the file, the calculator actually passed the wrong data. 1155, not this calculator, the other calculator, because we click here 3 times instead of power. We work the messages out here almost immediately. Otherwise, it's really working fine. Really, let's see what will happen if we change in our registration of services that 1155, not this calculator. Here we say instead of using calculator, use a simple calculator. Messages out here, calculator just. Otherwise, and if we click F5, we're going to see if someone will invoke the auger. We change in our here we don't have to services that so we and later in here we say configuration we're going to see that nobody calculator use simple because the other calculator do not depend on this. Now nobody will create it. If someone will invoke it with some parameters, doesn't matter. Here the same like before it will do the calculation, but nobody create a file later in here we say configuration the old calculator which we had before the other do not have dependencies of the file and nobody will create it. So dependencies are created when they need to be created. If so you see how we change, but very simple things, and we do not care about dependencies. If this calculator needs auto dependencies, it can add immediately the dependencies are just say when they need to be created. This requires our auger. It will be created. Change. So now it's very easy to say about things. Let's say we have a constructor. We do not care. I need die auger. If this calculator needs auto dependencies, it can add immediately. Even without creating a field. Now our auger will be created because of this very easy. But as you see, I never know who is it. I just say I need this auger. And when your application grows and grows, you just say, okay, in this service I need a service. Of course,
even without creating to.
you see, when calculator is created, the other now is created the file worker just before that.
But if you see, I never.
And after that, it's work. Let's refresh again and see that this file worker was created now.
And when your application
because of the constructor,
say, okay,
because this constructor requires a worker and it was created by the dependency injection.
When calculator is created, the other.
Now, so later you can create other services and just specify where the services are needed, and you start to grow the application was created now. It's pretty easy with all the dependencies.
Because this constructor is
Okay,
requires a worker and it was
now we're
created
going
by
to
the
discuss a
dependency
little bit
when calculator is created.
where
now,
so later you can create. So we discuss what is the dependency injection, and we configure the services and so how we are going to easy with all the dependencies. So as you see, we injected now services to controllers, where usually you relate to constructor dependency injection. What is the dependency injection? They support this, and we configure services and so we are going to easy with all the dependencies. So as you see, we injected now services. So if later you change the service, usually you relate to constructor in our dependency injection what we needed, some calculator, some logger, or whatever, or you decided to add so changes in the dependencies, you just need to change the dependency class, like the calculator
if later
or
you
whatever.
change the service,
So no need to change anything of everybody who depends on some calculator or some logger or whatever, or you decide totally substitute the implementation with a different implementation. Like we have to calculate, just changing them. You can change the almost everything in this way. Changing of everybody when we're talking about, of course, everything we mean who will implement the interface and how it will implement with a different thing. But it's up to the implementer of the interface, not to everybody who can change the everybody almost knows about only what kind of operation when we're talking about everything, not who will implement the interface, and if there is other operations or how it will implement with a difference. But it's up to the implementer. Also, when you create everybody in this way, the entire organization of the classes, almost knows about the entire application is perfectly testable. Now we cannot invoke the controller, and we can pass some another calculator. Also, when we created a big numbers calculator, we can pass some fake logger, not the file logger itself, because we don't wish when we're testing the calculator if it's calculating correctly the numbers to work something in the file. When we see if the calculations are correct or not, numbers calculator we can do. Oh, we can pass our logger controllers and services now supports unit testing the calculator if it's calculating correctly the numbers. Application is testable from the unit testing point of view. Are correct or not, numbers calculate we can do. So our controllers and services now supports when you have a controller and you have especially for the NDC, you cannot have more than you can use more than one constructor, which is a kind of limitation, because MVC will not know which one to invoke when it needs to create an instance of when you have a controller when a request goes to the server side. So you create a request for the user to make a request more than one site. It needs to create an instance of the controller, because MVC will not know every time it creates an instance of it. Every time when you click even F5 on the controller, when it creates an instance, now we are debugging it, create a request and it will create every time an instance of it. But if you have multiple constructors, it will not know which one to create. Now I put here every time it creates an instance of it. Every time we click even F5, it will create a file logger. Let me disable all the others. We don't need this breakpoints, file controller, of course the calculator, and finally the constructor to invoke. I will keep only this breakpoint. When I click F5 and now click refresh, of course it will create again the controller and later we invoke the operation index. So it needs to create again this breakpoint. But important is here that we have more than one constructor, and finally the constructor it will not know which one I will invoke this breakpoint. When a request goes to the server side, of course it will create again the that's why you need to have only one with all the dependencies. So it needs to create. What is that? Our important is here that we have more than one constructor, and finally all other services are usable in any other controllers and services. When a request goes to the server side. Now, for example, we have a Wogger, we can use the Wogger also in MVC. And in the MVC home, home controller, let's say, I need here the Wogger also. I go in any other controllers, and this is let's remove this Wogging because I here use another Wogger in interface, some Wogger. So now when we have a request to this controller, it will create the Wogger, and later when I invoke this index, I can say that the index was invoked because I with this here use another. I can say here again using also the Wogger face interface. The calculator is using the Wogger. This class is also using the Wogger, and I do it intentionally because of the next slides. Wogger. Now I will work all the operations which goes to the server side. I can say home / index, and I can even say what are the parameters here. The calculator is using the Wogger. This class is also using the Wogger with, and I do it intentionally because of the next slides. And you can specify here the parameters. All the operations which goes to the server side. I can say home / a, and I can even say what are the parameters here. Let's again use the formatting here because with what I'm specifying here is the next one. Let's say privacy error. What here we don't have anything here. Privacy. Let's put it also in the privacy when this privacy was invoked. Home / again privacy formatting here, specifying that it was invoked. Specifying here is the next one. Let's say. Now, as you see, the Wogger was used here. What here to specify that some operations are already invoked also in the privacy when this privacy was invoked. What we change here? Nothing. We don't know even anything about the Wogger. We know that specifying that we wish to use this service. That's all. And good. Nothing else. Now, just running into the dependency injection will pass and Wogger here operations are which is nice. Later we can say that we depend on other services here. What we change here? And we can use them. Even without any promise, so it's pretty easy. We wish to use this service. That's now, if I run it to see that nothing it will create, it will manage to create to invoke the controller with the two dependency calculator and the Wogger. Because it knows what to create for my Wogger and so I calculator. And if they have dependency, they will be created. It will manage to create. And that's all the controller. Now all the operations also, which were invoked index. Even this one, which is the privacy calculator. To invoke this one, if I go to the file, we see that both of these operations are worked. So we discussed that it's here the work. You can open directly from Visual Studio. You see, home index was invoked with these params, and home privacy invoked in this moment. You can run if I go to the file, measure how much time it takes whatever if you need to work. So we discussed that in version, but later about such kind of directly from Visual Studio. You see this type of home index. So you see how now our Wogger is used in two places, and everywhere where it needs to be used. Measure how much time we just register the services. This was what are the services, but later about such kind of directly. So here is the general home index. So you see how now our Wogger is used in the general and everywhere where structure when you have dependencies. You have some constructor and you just specifying which are the dependencies. And usually they're interfaces, which is the best, but not always. That's why we use here is this configuration file, which maybe we don't need an interface on it. That's why we created directly a configuration file. You have some constructor. So this is register dependencies in the controller. Now, when we create this calculator Wogger, they can be used in any controller. This configuration file we prepared, which and later they can be used everywhere. And consider that, for example, you have a Wogger. So this is register dependencies and you use everywhere the file Wogger. When we create it later, you can decide to change the file Wogger with another Wogger. It will be nightmare to go to all controls and change everywhere where the file Wogger is used. And consider that, for example, you have a Wogger. So this is register dependencies and you use everywhere the file Wogger. And later you can decide to change the file Wogger or whatever is the operation. It will be nightmare to go You just specify what service you need and you configure it. So here is the service lifetime. We used at singleton, which say that when someone needs, which means controller or another service, whatever is the operation, it will instantiate only once in the application lifetime. And you configure it. So here is the service lifetime. This instance until the application is live. Someone start the application, it will later create another instance, of course. But until the application is ready or another whatever is the operation, it will not create a new instance. Only once in the application lifetime. It will reuse the same instance that was created. So here, for example, this instance until the application is live. This way, it will create once the configuration and it will pass it everywhere, of course. But until the application is ready, someone can change the configuration, during on flight. For example, we can have some configuration page where we can change the configuration actually values on the file. They can be saved in a file, but also because we have the configuration on a single instance of it, we can change it in the memory and our application will on flight. Will actually will work perfectly if someone change the configuration. And we can do this actually. They can be saved in a file. Very interestingly, because we have the configuration. Let's even create this with URLs and see that how we can change the configuration on the file. Will actually will work perfectly when the privacy is invoked, and we can do this here. They can be saved in a new, very interestingly. We new work file create this with URL some and see that how we can change some default value. No, this is string. Say when the privacy can say if new work file is not null, we new work file or not empty. You can check later even. Use the configuration. Now it depends on the configuration. We can ask for the configuration here. Also, work file. There is one interface which is called I service provider, which can be used to get the services when you need the service. Because not always you wish someone to create it. Sometimes you wish to say, give me the instance here of the dependency injections. There is one interface which is dependency injection automatically provider, one I service provider, which you can use to create this. Not always you wish someone to create a service provider every time when control is needed, but it will not create, for example, the configuration. But it's this is one approach which I'm going to use, which I don't like because this is a very famous service locator pattern that we ask the dependency injection explicitly to create to give us the instance like provider dot configuration. But I do not create the instance. This is one approach. Let me create a field, which I don't like because this is you can say provider service locator dot pattern get service. You can say which service you wish explicitly like to give us the instance like the configuration. I do not create the instance. This is one approach. Let me create a field, which I don't like because you can say provider service locator dot pattern get service. Now we get the configuration. You can even change like you can say configuration dot file name because we don't have a property. What was the property of this service? Because get service we will return the service of type I configuration. Why it doesn't return a generic version? Change like you can say get service dot file name because we don't have a property instance. I service provider get service. We need to cast it. There was some generic version get service. We will return the get service of type I configuration. Why it doesn't return a configuration? As you see now, you need to cast something like this, and now you can say work file because it was not with get service get etc. You can change actually. There was some file with the unit. A little bit ugly. Now it's saying that but non-generic version cannot be used with type argument. And now we can say work file get service because it was not type of the service with get. There is a generic version. You cannot change actually. There was where it is using dependency injection. Now it's in the dependency injection. I know that it's a generic version which is used. That's why we don't need to argue this actually.
And now we can see what file.
Get service. So we can here specify what is the logger. Not changing, but it is where it is really using dependency injection logger, because in dependency injection has the same application, the same interface as you see. There is a generic version, which but that's why we don't need to interfaces here. Specify that is the logger. Let's otherwise it will start to what is the logger. It's not complaining now. So let's do not change this. Dependency injection. Now you see we get the configuration. So you see it's a little bit more complex to do this, but even that is not going to work without problem. Specify that is the logger. But if otherwise it will start to, you can see even say just I need the configuration here, just the configuration itself. Now you see we get what is the difference. It's a little bit more complex if you specify. If you specifying the dependency infrastructure, which means that this means that every time when an instance of home controller just is created, configuration here, it will create also the configuration, and not always you need what is the difference. Actually, because of the logger specified, this will be created, so it's not performance problem. But sometimes means that every time when you wish in the constructor to specify all the dependencies, like it will create configuration, and not always but what is the difference. Actually, because of this instance will be created every time when an instance of home controller is created. Sometimes from the performance point of view, this is not so good, and that's why sometimes you wish the dependency service provider and only this method, which is not privacy, when this is invoked. But this instance will be created every time when configuration. Only in this case you wish to get the instance from the performance to ask the dependency. This is not so great in the instance because and that's why sometimes is the service provider a little bit more time consuming. Usually it should take milliseconds to create almost every object, but sometimes to create this object configuration, only in this case you wish time consuming. And why to create this object if only some method this is required? And that's why a little bit more time consuming. Usually it should take, but only in such cases. Otherwise, it's always better to use this approach. And because we know that because of the logger, only this case you wish time consuming, and we are going to create the configuration, so it will be created some method before that, and just the same instance will be passed here.
Sorry, only in privacy method or any methods can we make this like this provider get service?
Everywhere application, so it will be created, but you need just the provider itself. So even if you don't have the provider injected, but only in such cases, otherwise if you don't have the provider injected in the constructor, you can get the provider
get service.
with everywhere application, so there is a method you need just the provider itself. Called I think this. So even if you don't have the provider injected, check what it was. Context dot get you can get the provider request services and it will give you the service provider. You can say from here get the service like configurations and it will give each to return the service. Let's see what is the method. Get you can get there is two versions, get service, and this is the configuration. So this is another way service provider. You can say from here get the service like it's another way without injecting the iService provider. It will give each to return. This is what is the method. Get some dependency. This service provider this is created internally by the MVC. This is the configuration. It registers another way. That if someone needs the service provider, it's another way. It will create it and the interface for this is iService provider. So consider that there is a service provider which is created, which you can find it where it's created exactly. Because if you go to register the startup, that if someone needs the service provider file and it's another way. Let me check it will create it and the interface for is not created. So it's internally it's not visible here. But this service provider is created and it's like because if you go it's automatically added by the startup. That is a lot of services are added automatically. File and later we're going to see like it will create it and the interface for someone is not created. iService provider and the implementation of the iService provider. But this iService provider is added by MVC see automatically. It's automatically, and that's why you can later inject everywhere iService provider and ask the service provider to get the instance in this way. But iService provider in the HTTP context, we have this additional property request services, which returns the service provider, which was registered everywhere by the MSC. So, because sometimes we don't wish to have here iService provider, but this is a convenient way. But this approach, the property when you ask for the services, which returns the service provider, which was registered everywhere by the MSC directly, because sometimes we don't wish not like have here iService provider, but we rely on dependency injection to inject convenient way. But this give me these dependencies, give me these instances when you ask for which services. So create instance for me of this I configuration or something else. Directly, it can be everything. It will create this for you. If there is an instance already rejected, it will give you the instance. So the good is that even that is a little bit better practice, which use this so create instance okay to a pattern of this I configuration, or sometimes this is required, can be everything. Sometimes you wish to say, give me the instance of this explicitly, because you don't wish every time this instance to be created. For example, if you have only single action where configuration is needed, like our case, why you need to here specifying the configuration when only one method of all the methods is using, because you don't wish every time this instance to be created. Maybe all the other methods are using the calculator or the logger. That's why they are better here, like our case. But when you create here, when you're asking here for the dependencies, you know now if you say that on the dependency injection or here like this HTTP context request services get service, how we're going to test this method privacy if it's working fine with the unit testing? It will be much harder because it will internally create some, it will ask for some other classes on the dependency injection. We cannot pass like this HTTP context request service mock get service. How we're going to test this method called double instance. The best is mock instance, which is let's say some another configuration or work file. You cannot pass to this. So when you are testing, it's much harder. Even that's not a problematic one sometimes. But you see now we say this HTTP context mock instance is not so good idea, because when we test later with unit testing this method, maybe there is no HTTP context, because when you run the test, they do not run in the same context like the web applications. There is no HTTP context there. Nobody makes HTTP requests to the unit test. When we test later, and this is the problem when you use this service locator pattern, but sometimes it's required. That's why it's better in the same context like the web application to use iService provider context there. There is nobody makes context give me. Even that this is the simplest way. It's a little bit more complex way. And finally, the easiest case, of course, is to use just dependency request. But that's why the dependency constructor are considered one of the best usually. So it's up to you. Now I put all the dependencies here in 3 lines. Even that this is the simplest way. Some questions, basically. And finally, the easiest case,
I understand.
Thank you. But that's why the dependency constructor are considered one of the best usually. So it's up to you. Now let's use the simplest possible approach. Even that all of them are questions, I will keep these 2 lines. You see that all of them will work.
I understand.
Only just to check that they are working. I'm not going to use them actually. Even that I actually here. So now let's change it. So I will use all of them. Now, for example, let's use with all the approaches. If I use the first one, I will say configuration.log file is equal to the new log file working. I'm not going. And this will happen if the log file is not known. Which actually we created here, but so I will use all of them now to see the source code. So this is one way. Of course, why we invoke this in the privacy, nobody knows. We can change this with something this will happen in the change work file which actually we created here, something like this. But here we actually, so this is one way. Of course, a lot of things, not just this. This is the first approach. The second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service, but sometimes it's a kind of one way. And the last time is if someone configure the first approach, the second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service, but sometimes it's a kind of one way. And the last time is if someone configure the first approach, the second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service, but sometimes it's a kind of one way. And the last time is if someone configure the first approach, the second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service, but sometimes it's a kind of one way. And the last time is if someone configure the first approach, the second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service, but sometimes it's a kind of one way. And the last time is if someone configure the first approach, the second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service, but sometimes it's a kind of one way. And the last time is if someone configure the first approach, the second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service, but sometimes it's a kind of one way. And the last time is if someone configure the first approach, the second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service, but sometimes it's a kind of one way. And the last time is if someone configure the first approach, the second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service, but sometimes it's a kind of one way. And the last time is if someone configure the first approach, the second approach to ask the provider to give you some service. In this case, it's the configuration here, something like this. The configuration you can consider as a service,